A crowbar swung violently through the storm last night, striking metal with an echoing clang that pierced the darkness. Rain hammered down relentlessly, drowning screams of warning beneath thunder's fierce growl. Blood mixed with water, pooling on cracked asphalt beneath flickering security lights. Betrayal doesn't wait for daylight, and sabotage doesn't announce itself with courtesy. It moves in silence, strikes from shadows, and leaves ruin behind. But tonight, as flames ignite deep below the concrete floors and secrets whisper in the corridors of corporate power, the quiet courage of an ordinary man stands between disaster and hope. Tonight, the lines between trust and deception blur beneath a sky ablaze with lightning, and a father's resolve becomes the only thing capable of holding the darkness at bay. John Harrington never planned on finding himself hunched over the engine cowling of a multi-million-dollar jet in the middle of a thunderstorm. Yet here he was, a 58-year-old aviation mechanic with a patched-up jacket and silver-streaked hair, working by the flickering light of an emergency lamp. A bitter wind whipped across the remote airstrip, bending the skeletal outlines of nearby mesquite trees. Behind him, uniformed military personnel secured the perimeter with rifles, cutting imposing silhouettes against flashes of lightning. Their presence wasn't just precautionary. Rumor had it there was someone important on board, someone with powerful enemies. John couldn't help but recall his own days in the Air Force, where he'd been a flight line mechanic. Those days had taught him two things: how to think on his feet under pressure and how to sniff out sabotage. He'd arrived at dusk, summoned by a frantic phone call from the airstrip's manager. The usual maintenance crews had hit a dead end, and a precarious fuel leak combined with an electrical anomaly was grounding the plane indefinitely. The storm made conditions nearly impossible, but John was no stranger to rolling up his sleeves when everything was on the line. His late wife, Sarah, had always admired that unwavering sense of responsibility. It was the same stubborn honesty that had earned him both loyal customers and occasional enemies at Harrington Aero. The small family-run repair shop he inherited from his father. Now, with Sarah gone, John and his 17-year-old daughter, Annie, were doing their best to keep the shop afloat and preserve the Harrington legacy. After wiping droplets of rain from his lined brow, John replaced a damaged hydraulic fuse and examined a suspiciously frayed wiring harness. Something wasn't adding up. The defect looked almost too precise, almost as if someone had intentionally cut through the insulation to guarantee failure at a certain stress point. Outside, the thunder rumbled like distant artillery, and the adrenaline in John's veins surged with the force of a younger man. The father in him wondered if it might be safer to walk away. The mechanic in him knew he couldn't. Too many lives and too many stories depended on that aircraft getting off the ground. A quick glance at his watch revealed that midnight was creeping closer. He could already imagine Annie waiting at home, worrying, though she'd never say it out loud. She understood the demands of this life. She was practically raised with the smell of aviation fuel in her nostrils. By the time he emerged from under the jet's belly, the storm had intensified. Sheets of rain battered the tarmac, and visibility had dropped to a few yards. That's when John noticed an imposing SUV parked just beyond the security fence. Inside, someone watched him intently. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating his every move. The uneasy feeling in John's stomach grew stronger. He closed his toolbox, the same battered box that had belonged to his father, complete with decades of scuff marks, and signaled to the pilot to run another diagnostic test. The engine roared to life, sputtering once before humming in a steady rhythm. Relief washed over John, but a new question invaded his thoughts: if this was sabotage, who was behind it and why? When dawn broke, John found himself in a makeshift break room on the edge of the hangar, sipping tepid coffee. A single fluorescent light buzzed overhead, adding to the atmosphere of forced wakefulness. He had stayed up most of the night, not just to ensure the plane was airworthy, but also to confirm his suspicions. He'd snapped a few photos of the damaged wiring with his phone blurry, but clear enough to suggest foul play. Now, he couldn't shake the feeling that bigger forces were at work here. A tired-looking officer stepped into the break room, removing his cap to reveal sweat-matted hair. That was some miracle work you did last night, he said, offering John a handshake. Name's Lieutenant Morales. We appreciate you staying. The senator on that plane was needed in Washington ASAP. They were about to send a helicopter to airlift him out, but you saved us all a lot of trouble. John nodded, feeling the burn of fatigue behind his eyes. Just doing my job, Lieutenant. Glad it all worked out. Truth be told, he wanted to ask if the officer had discovered anything about the sabotage. But one look at Morales's guarded expression told him he wouldn't get straight answers now. Classified intel was above his pay grade, especially as a civilian consultant brought in for an emergency fix. He wondered about the person in the SUV. The blacked-out windows and discreet presence pointed to private security, or maybe a corporate bigwig. Then, as if conjured by his thoughts, the same SUV pulled up to the hangar entrance. Out stepped a tall, elegant woman in a crisp blazer, her dark hair pulled back. She surveyed the cluttered space stacks of worn tires, boxes of spare parts, the battered chairs, and walked right up to John with measured poise. Her voice carried a quiet self-assurance. Mr. Harrington, I'm Monica Pierce. I manage Win Aerotech's Special Projects Division. Pleased to meet you, John replied, attempting to rub the sleep from his eyes. He recognized the name Win Aerotech. It was one of the largest aerospace companies in the country. Known for its leaps in advanced aeronautics and rumored expansions into space tourism, for an old-timer like John, who prided himself on hands-on mechanical work, giant corporations often felt like alien behemoths. Yet Monica Pierce's gaze was anything but cold or distant. It was intensely curious, as though she was trying to read the fine print of a blueprint, and he was the blueprint. Your repairs helped avoid a massive diplomatic and political headache, she said, extending a business card. I'd like to talk to you about a possible position at Win Aerotech. We've been searching for someone with deep practical experience. He blinked, taken aback. It wasn't every day that an ordinary mechanic from a small family shop got a job offer from a high-profile aerospace corporation, especially one that was rumored to be developing next-level spaceflight technology. I appreciate the offer, ma'am, but I've got a shop to run and a daughter in high school. Monica's expression softened. Of course, this is just a conversation. If you decide you're open to hearing more, come see me in New York. We're building a new maintenance facility for our East Coast expansion, and we need honest, skilled experts. Her eyes flicked to the photos on John's phone, the ones showing the suspicious wiring. By the way, you might want to keep those images safe, she added in a low tone. If there was foul play, it might be part of something bigger. Sabotage can come from unexpected places. John nodded, a subtle shiver creeping up his spine. There was an undercurrent of warning in her voice, and he wasn't sure if it was for his benefit or hers. After she left, he sank into the nearest chair, swirling the last dregs of coffee in his paper cup. A job offer from Win Aerotech. It sounded like the kind of opportunity many would jump at. But John's life had always been about simpler things, keeping Harrington Aero afloat and giving Annie the best future possible. Then again, maybe Win Aerotech could offer resources and connections he'd never dream of in his rural corner of the country. Back at Harrington Aero, the atmosphere was a stark contrast to the high-stakes airstrip from the previous night. The old tin roof rattled whenever a plane soared overhead, and the smell of decades-old engine oil lingered everywhere. From the outside, the hangar looked unassuming, a large weathered sign that read, Harrington Aero, Est, 1961, and a gravel parking lot with a few pickup trucks and dusty sedans. Inside, it was a place built on trust, where regulars showed up not just for a tune-up, but sometimes for a conversation. Annie Harrington was busy organizing parts on sturdy metal shelving. She'd grown up in this environment. Her earliest memories involved sitting on a tall stool, passing wrenches to her dad as he tinkered with a carburetor. Now 17, she had her mother's determined green eyes and her father's knack for problem-solving. She noticed every detail, from the faint beep of a test rig in the corner to the subtle worry lines on John's face when he walked in. You're back, she greeted, setting aside an inventory list. The call from Mr. Dexter said it was an emergency out there. Everything okay? John exhaled, forcing a weary smile. Yeah, we got that plane airborne, but it was complicated. I'll fill you in later. He hung his jacket on a hook, revealing a grease-stained button-down shirt beneath. Though physically exhausted, his mind buzzed with thoughts of sabotage, the mysterious Monica Pierce, and the ominous invitation to New York. Any customers today? Annie pointed to a maintenance form clipped on a clipboard. A local pilot named Bryce had some engine trouble with his old Cessna. I told him we'd take a look tomorrow. Thought you could use some rest first. He ruffled her hair affectionately, much like he did when she was a little girl. You always have my back, kiddo. The father-daughter moment was comforting, but a nagging tension lingered in the back of John's mind. He recalled Pierce's warning about the photos on his phone images, suggesting sabotage. If bigger conspiracies were afoot, he worried about Annie's safety. After all, it wouldn't be the first time unscrupulous types targeted the family of someone who knew too much. Over lunch, consisting of ham sandwiches on a makeshift table near the back of the hangar, John recounted the previous night's events to Annie. Her eyes widened at the mention of a possibly sabotaged wire harness, the presence of a high-profile senator, and the sudden arrival of Monica Pierce. She stayed quiet for a moment, absorbing each detail. So, Win Aerotech, isn't that the company that's testing rocket engines out in the desert? They were on the news last month for unveiling some new propulsion technology. Probably. I've never paid them much attention, John replied, finishing off his sandwich. I always figured those big corporations don't have much use for guys like me, hands-on folks with no fancy degrees. Annie tapped the table thoughtfully. Sometimes the best solution is the old-school approach. Dad, that's what you always say? She paused and then asked the question that had been hanging in the air. You think you'll consider it? John shrugged. I haven't made up my mind. I have to think about you, the shop, and whether that world is even right for us. Deep down, he couldn't shake the gut feeling that this was bigger than just a job offer. Maybe it was a chance to protect them from something they didn't fully understand yet. Or maybe it was an invitation into a lion's den. Let's just see how things unfold. As they cleaned up lunch, a small prop plane rumbled overhead, banked sharply, and disappeared into the horizon. It was a reminder of the life they'd always known, rooted in mechanical reliability, steady routines, and familial comfort. Win Aerotech was a different universe, but whether he liked it or not, that universe seemed to be reaching out to him, tugging on the threads of his fate. A week passed in an almost disorienting blur. During that time, John handled the usual parade of repairs, everything from single-engine Piper Cubs to well-worn crop dusters. Annie stayed on top of inventory, finances, and even found time to study for her upcoming physics exam. For a moment, life at Harrington Aero felt steady again, but John's mind drifted each night to the images of that tampered wiring. He'd tried searching the internet for clues: recent plane incidents, sabotage cases, or hush-hush news about Win Aerotech. Yet any leads he found were murky or too vague to connect. It wasn't until a Monday morning, when the phone rang off the hook, that a jolt of fresh tension buzzed through the hangar. The caller introduced himself as Garrett Tate, a local representative for Win Aerotech. He said Ms. Pierce was requesting a meeting with John in New York to discuss an urgent opportunity. John's first impulse was to politely decline, but something in Garrett's voice signaled that this was more than a routine follow-up. He hesitated, then agreed to speak with Ms. Pierce directly. Hours later, a video call was arranged. John sat in front of an ancient desktop computer in the corner of the hangar, the camera balanced on a stack of flight manuals. When Monica Pierce's face appeared on screen, poised, collected, and framed by a sleek office background, John felt a twinge of awkwardness. He'd never been much for technology, nor for formal conferences with powerful executives. Mr. Harrington. Good to see you again, Monica began, her tone respectful but urgent. I'll be blunt, We're expanding Win Aerotech's East Coast operations, and we need a chief maintenance supervisor with real-world experience. We're hemorrhaging time and money on theoretical engineers who lack on-the-ground mechanical know-how. I'd like you to consider joining us. John resisted the urge to rub the back of his neck, a telltale sign of discomfort. I'm flattered, but you know I run my own place out here. My daughter's in school. We've got a life. Monica nodded, her gaze flicking to some unseen notes on her side. Win Aerotech would offer relocation expenses, a substantial salary, and schooling options for your daughter. We have partnerships with top academies, places that specialize in STEM programs. I did some research. Annie has excellent grades in math and science. She deserves opportunities beyond a rural public school. He felt a protective tug in his chest. That's kind of you to say, but we're happy where we are. Monica let the moment hang before adding, this isn't just about you or Win Aerotech. Mr. Harrington, we're potentially on the brink of something revolutionary: space tourism, new jet propulsion technologies, but sabotage is real. We've encountered multiple suspicious incidents, both internal and external. I need someone I can trust on the ground, someone who's proven they won't cut corners or bow to pressure. A flicker of the old Air Force sense of duty sparked in John. He remembered the helplessness of discovering sabotage and not having the authority to fully investigate. Now, here was a chance to dive deeper, to safeguard an entire operation from the inside. But it also sounded like stepping into a minefield. After a beat of silence, he asked, and if I say no, Monica's tone remained even, then we'll keep looking, but it might not be fast enough. If whatever group orchestrated that sabotage targets us again, and it will, they'll find ways to do real damage. You've already seen what's at stake. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. I'm not trying to scare you. This is simply the reality of modern aerospace. John nodded, uncertain. Annie hovered in the background, listening quietly, her eyes bright with curiosity. Clicking the end call button felt like sealing a bargain with fate. One path led to routine days at the hangar, safe but maybe limited. The other led to unknown territory, high risk, high reward, and the promise of uncovering hidden threats. John spent the next few days in an unsettled haze, mulling over the offer. Annie was surprisingly supportive, seeing potential for advanced schooling and a broader future, yet he couldn't ignore the pang of guilt at the thought of uprooting their stable home life. He found himself replaying half-forgotten conversations with his late wife. Sarah had always been the adventurous spirit, the one to push him beyond his comfort zone. You can't fix everything by staying put, John, she would say. Sometimes you have to fly. It was a Wednesday evening when an event shattered the fragile calm. Annie was studying in the front office while John worked on a twin-engine Baron that belonged to a local charter pilot. Over the whir of an air compressor, he heard Annie scream. He dropped everything and sprinted toward her voice, adrenaline pounding. She stood by the open hangar door, visibly shaken, pointing at a dark sedan peeling out of their gravel lot. The car's driver had apparently snapped pictures or video of Annie from a distance. A creeping dread curled inside John's stomach. If Win Aerotech's sabotage warnings were accurate, then maybe someone was watching them now, testing their vulnerabilities. He called the local sheriff, who arrived with 2 deputies. They took statements, nodded sympathetically. But the truth was, they didn't have much to go on. A sedan with partial plates, no direct threats, only suspicion. The sheriff gave the standard caution about being vigilant, locking doors, and reporting anything else strange. After they left, John and Annie settled into an uneasy silence. That night, John couldn't sleep. He sat at the kitchen table, swirling a cup of decaf coffee. The overhead light cast a solitary glow on the stack of photos from that first sabotage incident. The wires. The hush-hush presence of that senator. Monica Pierce's warnings. Now a stranger snapping photos of his daughter. The coincidences felt too heavy, too close. He could almost sense the invisible lines connecting them all. In the living room, Pictures of Sarah and a much younger Annie decorated the shelves. They reminded him of the times he'd faced crises, financial or personal, and how Sarah's faith always pushed him to take bold steps. He picked up his phone and scrolled through an email Monica's assistant had sent a formal offer letter with an eye-popping salary and extensive benefits for Annie's education. The logic was almost inescapable: bigger stage, more resources, and the chance to uncover and neutralize whatever sabotage threatened the aviation world. Yet that didn't erase the fear that came with stepping into corporate territory, something that felt like a shark tank to a man used to wide-open skies. He exhaled sharply, realizing that every road sign pointed to a single conclusion: if he stayed, he'd be a sitting duck, waiting for someone more ruthless to make the next move. If he left, at least he'd have the advantage of being on the inside, with security measures and corporate clout. Annie needed safety. The world needed safer skies. And, in his heart, John suspected that the best way to protect them both was to accept Monica's offer and keep his wits sharp. With a trembling hand, he drafted a short email: Ms. Pierce, I've decided to accept your offer. Let me know how soon you need me in New York. He hit send and felt an odd mixture of relief and dread. Outside, a lone street lamp flickered, casting uncertain shadows across the gravel parking lot. For better or worse, the path ahead was set. The day John and Annie left Harrington Aero felt like a small funeral. Their close-knit community of pilots, farmers, and townspeople gathered outside the hangar to bid them farewell. Some folks brought homemade pies and cookies, as though John and Annie were going off to war. Old man Dexter, who managed the local airstrip, showed up in his rumpled uniform to salute John in a joking but heartfelt gesture. Even the local pastor came, saying a quick prayer for their protection. Annie, lugging a duffel bag full of textbooks and personal effects, blinked back tears. She'd grown up here. Her best memories were layered into every corner. The air smelled of dusty farmland, engine oil, and the promise of imminent rain. John tried to keep it together, shaking hands and hugging folks who'd become like family. His heart was a storm of emotions: pride in Annie's resilience, sorrow at leaving home, and an undercurrent of tension about the unknown future. They loaded up their old pickup truck, the paint chipped from years of service, towing a small U-Haul trailer with the essential tools from Harrington Aero, John's father's toolbox, a rolling cart of specialized wrenches, and a battered diagnostic kit he'd customized himself. He couldn't leave those behind. They were talismans of his life's work. The final step was locking up the hangar. The metallic clang as he turned the key for the last time resonated in his chest. On the road to New York, Annie fell silent, staring out the window at passing landscapes. Miles of farmland gradually gave way to highways and urban sprawl. They stopped overnight at a cheap motel near Louisville, too exhausted to keep driving. That night, John studied the Win Aerotech welcome packet, gleaming photos of modern aircraft engines, a sky blue corporate logo, and lines of visionary text about redefining the future of flight. It all felt intangible, like stepping into a brand new world. Annie eventually broke the silence, perching on the edge of the motel bed. "Dad, are you excited or just nervous?" He exhaled, setting down the welcome packet. "Both, I guess. Excited to give you new opportunities. Nervous about not fitting in, maybe." He paused, trying to articulate a deeper fear. "These big companies have a way of swallowing people up. I don't want to lose who we are." Annie nodded, hugging her knees. "We won't. You've always told me our family's strength is in what we stand for. Integrity, hard work, and that personal touch. Maybe that's exactly why they need you." Dad. Her faith in him was a balm, momentarily easing the knot in his gut. He recalled how, as a small child, Annie would watch planes with wide-eyed wonder, asking how the wings generated lift and why the engines made so much noise. She was already dissecting the mechanics of flight before she could ride a bike without training wheels. By the time they reached the city, John felt a pang of culture shock. Concrete towers and neon signs stretched for miles. Traffic roared and honked, a cacophony that drowned out any sense of calm. The address they'd been given led them to a modern apartment building, courtesy of Win Aerotech's relocation package. A sharply dressed doorman greeted them, raising an eyebrow at their pickup truck and dust-laden trailer. John couldn't tell if it was amusement or mild disapproval. Probably both. In the elevator, Annie clutched her backpack, scanning the sleek control panel. "Everything's so fancy," she murmured. "Yeah," John agreed. "Fancy's one word for it." The door dinged on their floor, opening to a well-lit hallway with plush carpeting. They found their unit a modest two-bedroom with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the metropolis. It was worlds apart from their cozy home back at the hangar. Yet as they stood in that modern, sterile living room, a shared glance told them both the same thing: there was no turning back. Win Aerotech's East Coast headquarters was housed in a futuristic building shaped like a stylized aircraft wing. Stepping inside for the first time, John felt a pang of wonder and unease. Glossy marble floors, polished metal accents, and large digital displays greeted him. Employees in tailored suits and sleek dresses hurried through the lobby, their shoes clacking a rapid-fire rhythm. Overhead, an LED installation depicted an ever-changing mosaic of planes and rockets. It looked more like a tech startup's playground than a mere corporate office. Annie trailed behind, practically glued to John's side, her eyes darting around at every new marble glass elevators that soared up the building's central atrium, interactive kiosks describing Win Aerotech's latest innovations. A polite receptionist checked them in and directed them to the 27th floor, where Monica Pierce's office was located. The elevator ride up felt surreal, as if they were ascending into a world of neon lights and intangible possibilities. At the 27th floor reception area, Monica's assistant, a kind-faced woman named Trina, welcomed them. "Ms. Pierce is eager to see you. Can I get you anything?" "Water, coffee." John declined politely, his throat already tight with nerves. Annie hesitated, then asked for water, if only to have something to hold on to. The wait lasted barely a minute before Monica herself appeared. Dressed in a slim black skirt and matching blazer, she wore a slight smile that conveyed warmth, though her posture remained every inch the executive, Mr. Harrington. "Annie, welcome," she said, leading them through a hallway lined with large windows overlooking Manhattan's sprawling skyline. "How was your trip?" John gave a slight shrug. "Long drive, but we made it safely." He noted how Monica's gaze lingered on Annie, perhaps assessing the daughter's eagerness or intelligence. They entered a spacious corner office. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a panoramic view of the city, with the East River glinting in the sunlight far below. On a modern steel desk sat a computer, a few stacked folders, and an ornate clock that hummed softly with each second. Monica gestured for them to sit in plush chairs while she took a seat behind her desk. "I'll cut to the chase," she began. "We're expanding our operations to include advanced propulsion research and possibly commercial space travel. The East Coast Division will oversee design, testing, and most critically, maintenance. We've had some disruptions in our supply chain and internal systems, which we suspect might be sabotage." Annie leaned forward, her curiosity piqued. "Any leads on who's behind it?" Monica's eyes flicked to John, as though measuring how much to reveal in front of his daughter. She made a decision. "We're still investigating, but let's just say we suspect competition from within the aerospace industry companies that want to be first to launch a fully commercial suborbital flight. Some might stoop to infiltration tactics." Her tone grew cooler. "Your father's experience with that sabotage plane suggests he understands this threat better than most. That's why we want him here." John cleared his throat. "I'll do my best to keep your engines and systems safe, but I'm no detective. I can only spot mechanical or technical foul play." Monica offered a wry smile. "Sometimes that's exactly what we need: a fresh set of eyes immune to corporate politics. As chief maintenance supervisor, you'll oversee inspections, train new hires, and design more foolproof safety protocols. I'll handle the corporate side budgets, security, and ensuring you have everything you need." She then turned to Annie. We also have a robust internship program for high school and college students interested in engineering. If you'd like, we could arrange something part-time around your school schedule. We're partnering with a specialized STEM academy not far from here. Annie's eyes lit up. I'd love that, she said, her voice brimming with excitement that John hadn't heard in a while. Seeing her enthusiastic reaction, he felt some tension in his chest begin to unwind. Monica clasped her hands. Excellent. Let's finalize the paperwork. Then I'll give you both a brief tour of our R&D labs. Welcome to Win Aerotech, John Harrington. May this be the start of a safer, brighter horizon for us all. Though her words were optimistic, the subtext remained danger still lurked, possibly even in these immaculate corridors. Someone had orchestrated sabotage before. They could do it again. As John followed Monica out of the office, a sense of resolve solidified within him. He might be a fish out of water here, but if unscrupulous competitors thought they could sabotage planes and put lives at risk, they'd soon learn that the old-school mechanic was the wrong guy to underestimate. Over the next week, John immersed himself in Win Aerotech's advanced maintenance division. The sheer scale of the operation was both awe-inspiring and disorienting. Instead of the humble hangar he was used to, he now oversaw multiple high-tech bays filled with cutting-edge diagnostic equipment. Drones buzzed overhead, scanning aircraft exteriors for microscopic flaws. Robotic arms precisely installed and removed engine components. Rows of 3D printed parts lay on counters, ready for specialized assembly. Yet for all the technology, John sensed a gap in practical knowledge among some of the newer staff. Many had impressive resumes, doctorates in aerospace engineering, experience with advanced software, but few understood the intuitive aspects of mechanical problem-solving the way he did. He began hosting daily briefings, emphasizing old-fashioned checklists, thorough inspections, and that intangible skill of listening to an engine. Some employees were intrigued, others skeptical. A few, like a young engineer named Kyle, soaked up John's advice like a sponge, eager to pair academic knowledge with real-world techniques. Annie, meanwhile, was adjusting to her new school, a STEM-focused academy. The transition was rocky at first, big city social dynamics, advanced coursework, but her innate curiosity soon won over her teachers. She juggled robotics club meetings with a part-time internship at Win Aerotech. There, she assisted in designing software modules for predictive maintenance. The father-daughter duo saw each other in passing most evenings. Over quick dinners in their apartment, they swapped stories of data anomalies, mechanical mishaps, and the daily scramble to keep Win Aerotech's schedule on track. Gradually, John noticed anomalies in the supply chain. Parts from a certain vendor arrived with subtle defects, microscopic cracks, or incomplete firmware for electronic components. These flaws were easily missed by automated scanners, but stood out to his trained eye. When he tried contacting the vendor, he received vague excuses about manufacturing errors. Something about it felt too coincidental. He documented everything in a handwritten log he kept locked in his old toolbox, the same one from Harrington Aero. The digital system was robust, but John had learned that any digital record could be manipulated by the right saboteur. About 2 weeks into his new position, John had his first tense confrontation. Martin Hale, Win Aerotech's VP of Operations, paid an unannounced visit to the maintenance bays. Dressed in a tailored suit and accompanied by a small entourage, Hale's presence exuded corporate ambition. He marched through the facility, criticizing how many staff hours John allocated for unnecessary manual inspections, which he deemed inefficient in an era of automation. The men who followed him scribbled notes on tablets, occasionally glancing at John with cool disapproval. "Mr. Harrington," Hale said, standing near a towering engine test stand. "I understand you come with an impressive track record, but let's be clear. Win Aerotech prides itself on innovation. We can't afford to drag our feet with exhaustive manual checks. Productivity metrics are a major factor." John remained cordial. "I respect that, sir. But after seeing real sabotage in the field, I believe thoroughness is non-negotiable. Cutting corners on inspections is asking for trouble." Hale's lips formed a tight line. Corporate has certain standards, and we must deliver results. Technology is here to assist us in surpassing old limitations. Let's not cling to outdated methods. Monica appeared just in time, diffusing the tension by politely interjecting that John was brought on board specifically to refine and improve safety protocols. Hale gave a condescending nod and swept away with his entourage. John couldn't shake the feeling that Hale's skepticism was more than just a difference of opinion. Something in that man's eyes suggested a deeper agenda. Later that evening, John finished logging the day's findings in his toolbox journal. He flipped back to older entries detailing the sabotage he'd witnessed. An uneasy realization crept over him, while Win Aerotech was outwardly supportive of his thoroughness. Corporate forces like Hale might undermine the very safety protocols he was trying to strengthen. If sabotage was truly lurking in the shadows, it might be enabled by those looking to sidestep caution for profit or power. One crisp Friday afternoon, Monica surprised John by appearing at his workstation with 2 cups of coffee in hand. She rarely ventured down into the engine bay unless there was pressing news. Her posture carried a certain weight, and John suspected she wasn't there for small talk. He took the offered coffee with a nod of thanks, eyeing her cautiously. "I wanted to update you on something," Monica said, her voice muted against the hum of testing equipment. "Our internal security team found irregularities in the software logs for the last shipment of electronic engine control units. Whoever's tampering with the system is good, very good, but we're closing in on them. I want you to be prepared." John sipped his coffee, letting the warmth calm his nerves. Prepared for what? Exactly. Monica's gaze drifted to a group of junior mechanics testing a new turbine assembly. These saboteurs or corporate spies, whatever you want to call them, won't sit idle. We suspect they've already tried to plant false error codes, inflating your maintenance schedule. If they can make you and your staff look incompetent or overly cautious, it'll drive up costs and shake investor confidence. The notion of being set up to fail made John's jaw tighten. So they want to sabotage Win Aerotech by undermining the maintenance protocols and painting us as a liability. That means they could disrupt schedules, cause mechanical breakdowns, or even worse. He paused, recalling that senator's flight from weeks ago. "You think the plane I fixed back home was part of the same plot?" Monica gave a subtle nod. "It's likely. Whoever was behind that sabotage might have had broader plans to embarrass or strong-arm us. We have reason to believe your presence here was never a secret. Expect more pushback from within our own ranks. Martin Hale is only one potential obstacle." John's thoughts churned. Hale's a smooth talker. High corporate title. But I can't see him risking lives just to climb a corporate ladder. She shrugged. "People have done far worse for far less. Keep your eyes open. And remember, if you find anything suspicious, bring it directly to me or our head of security. Don't rely on the standard chain of command." The weight of her words settled over John like a new mission directive. He looked around at the hive of activity technicians calibrating sensors, engineers bent over CAD models, the whir of 3D printers extruding specialized parts. This was the pulsing heart of Win Aerotech's dreams. One well-placed sabotage could poison everything. Before Monica left, she noticed the battered toolbox by John's workstation. "You still using that old thing?" she asked, half smiling. He patted it affectionately. "Belonged to my father, then me. I keep my personal logs in here too. I guess I trust pen and paper more than any password-protected software." Monica exhaled softly, perhaps relieved to see the unwavering integrity he brought to every nut and bolt. "That may be one of our best defenses," she said. "Something that can't be hacked. Just watch your back." "John," the conversation ended on that ominous note, leaving him with a fresh surge of caution. If corporate sabotage was a war, then stealth and cunning were the weapons of choice. As he resumed his tasks, he mulled over how best to protect Annie and whether she might already be a target. She was bright, inquisitive, and had access to certain systems through her internship. The thought made his hands clench involuntarily around a torque wrench. People messing with him was one thing. Messing with his daughter would be a step too far. That weekend, John finally had a chance to breathe. He and Annie decided to explore the city, hoping to feel less like strangers in a hyper-urban landscape. They rode the subway, an experience that left John marveling at the massive humanity packed into each car, and ended up at a crowded street fair in Midtown. The air smelled of roasting nuts and hot dogs, and Annie's eyes sparkled as she took in the sights. After browsing stalls of handmade crafts, they settled at a small cafe with an outdoor patio. John ordered a slice of apple pie and a black coffee, while Annie tried some bubble tea concoction she found novel. The first few minutes were spent people watching tourists, snapping selfies, street musicians performing jazz renditions of pop songs, and busy professionals checking phones even on a Saturday. For a brief moment, it felt normal, a respite from corporate espionage and sabotage concerns, yet the reprieve didn't last. As John dug into his pie, he spotted a familiar face across the street. The man wore a casual jacket and sunglasses, but John was nearly certain he'd seen that face in the Wynn Aerotech building. A mid-level manager or maybe a consultant, someone who'd been in Martin Hale's entourage. The man seemed to notice John at the same time, pausing before turning abruptly and disappearing into the crowd. John set down his fork. "Annie, do me a favor, finish up quickly. We should get going." She frowned, concerned. "You okay?" He forced a smile, not wanting to spook her. "Yeah, just realized I have a few things to check before Monday. Some parts ordering I forgot about." In truth, alarm bells were ringing in his mind. Seeing a Wynn Aerotech staffer outside of official hours was no crime, but the sudden, almost evasive departure made him uneasy. Were they being followed, or was it just a coincidence back at the apartment? He ushered Annie upstairs. Once she was settled, John stepped back outside to glance around the street. No sign of the man. Still, he felt eyes on him, that prickly sense of being observed. He retreated inside, securing the locks. The doorman, sensing something off, asked if everything was all right, but John brushed it off with a stiff nod. As Annie went to her room to finish homework, John sat at the kitchen table, the city's lights glowing through the window. He replayed the moment, searching for any reason that man might have for following them. Then he recalled how corporate espionage often involved intimidation. If someone was trying to unnerve him into making a mistake, they were succeeding. Another layer of tension weighed on him, heavier now because it involved Annie's safety too. He grabbed a notepad from a kitchen drawer and scribbled down the approximate time, location, and the man's description. If this escalated, he might need a paper trail of every odd incident. He also resolved to talk to Monica about increased security. Wynn Aerotech had better resources for personal protection than he did as a lone mechanic, but he wasn't sure if he trusted their entire chain of command. The clock ticked toward midnight by the time he drifted to bed, mind cluttered with half-formed escape plans and defensive strategies. Tomorrow would be another day in the high-tech crucible that was Wynn Aerotech. If sabotage was indeed lurking, it might soon reveal itself in a far more dangerous form. By Monday morning, John was back in the thick of things at Wynn Aerotech. He'd arrived early, determined to check the logs and inventory lists before the usual bustle. The maintenance hangar was eerily quiet, rows of aircraft and engine parts lined up under fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly. Using a specialized scanner, he reviewed shipments received over the weekend. Most were standard, but 2 crates stood out, one from a new vendor with suspicious labeling, the other an unscheduled delivery with incomplete documentation. He was scanning the barcodes on the suspicious crates when Annie appeared, school backpack over one shoulder. "Dad, I had a free period, so I thought I'd drop by. Did you see the email about the new engine control modules? They want me to help test them with the robotics club's algorithms." She noticed the look on his face and frowned. Something wrong, John hesitated. He didn't want to alarm her, but he also believed in honesty. "I found some questionable shipments. Could be nothing. But after everything, we can't be too careful. Also, keep an eye out for any unusual changes to the system you're working on." Annie nodded, her expression steeled with a seriousness beyond her years. "Got it. I'll poke around the code and cross-reference the shipments with the system logs." She slipped on a pair of protective gloves and followed John to the crates. They pried open one, revealing engine sensors. At first glance, they looked genuine, but the packaging and some of the serial numbers didn't match Win Aerotech's official suppliers. Before they could investigate further, Monica's voice echoed through the hangar. "John, Annie, up here." She stood on the overhead walkway, scanning the vast maintenance floor. "We need you both in the conference room. Right now." They traded worried glances and hurried after her. The conference room felt crowded besides Monica. Several department heads were present, including Martin Hale. A large video monitor displayed a media outlet's live broadcast. The news ticker read, "Win Aerotech safety concerns. Anonymous source claims internal turmoil." A short video clip played of a distorted voice alleging that Win Aerotech's new expansions were dangerously undersupervised and plagued by mechanical issues. The source singled out a rural mechanic lacking modern expertise, leading to oversight failures. Everyone in the room turned to John. Hale cleared his throat. "Well, Mr. Harrington, seems your old-fashioned approach is making headlines." Care to comment? John felt the sting of the accusation. He clenched his jaw and tried to remain calm. "I haven't spoken to any media. That voice is fake. Obviously." Monica stepped in. "We know you're not behind this, John, but the timing is too perfect. Someone's using your background to discredit our entire safety protocol. This is exactly what we feared: sabotage by smear campaign." Tension crackled in the air. Hale's face was unreadable. "We might need to present data to the public or our investors, showing our safety track record. Otherwise, we risk losing contracts, and you can guess who that puts in the hot seat, both of you," he said, glancing between Monica and John. Annie raised her hand slightly. An awkward gesture in a boardroom, but everyone's attention was so frazzled that nobody minded. "I can help gather logs and code commits proving that we're taking every precaution. If we can show actual evidence of sabotage, we flip the narrative." A faint smirk crossed Hale's lips, though it was unclear whether he was impressed or patronizing. "By all means, Miss Harrington, put your coding skills to work. We need all the help we can get." Apparently, Monica ended the meeting with a firm statement. "We respond calmly and with facts. Let's get to work." The crowd dispersed, each department head with a to-do list. Hale lingered for a moment, locking eyes with John before he left the room. The stare felt like a challenge, somehow personal, as though Hale resented John's presence and the shift in corporate power dynamics it represented. John, Annie, and Monica remained, reviewing the news clip. "This is only the beginning," Monica muttered, rubbing her temples. "If we don't expose the saboteurs soon, they'll escalate." John exhaled. "Then we escalate our own search. No more half measures." A plan was forming in his mind, one that involved cross-checking the suspicious shipments, the vendor records, and the digital sabotage trail. He only hoped they'd find answers before the next blow landed. That afternoon, John arranged a private meeting with Win Aerotech's head of security, a tall ex-military man named Lieutenant Caswell. They met in a secure room often used for sensitive discussions, its walls lined with sound-dampening material and no windows. Caswell had a firm handshake and the controlled posture of someone used to high-pressure situations. John felt an immediate kinship with him, reminiscent of the old Air Force camaraderie. John laid out his findings: suspicious parts deliveries, questionable software logs, and the recent media smear. He also revealed the incident where Annie had been stalked by a strange sedan back in their hometown. Caswell listened intently, jotting notes in a discreet notepad. "You're right to be concerned," he finally said, tapping his pen. "We suspect infiltration, possibly a double agent feeding false data to competitors or blackmailing certain executives. The sabotage could be two-pronged: physical tampering with parts and digital meddling in our systems." John's gut twisted. "Any leads on who might be behind it?" Caswell sighed, flipping through his notes. "No smoking gun yet. However, we have flagged Martin Hale's department for a thorough audit. He's been leading a faction pushing for faster results, minimal checks, higher profit margins." That's not proof of wrongdoing, of course, but combined with the hostility he shows you, it's suspicious. John felt vindicated, though it also meant treading carefully. How do we proceed? Caswell's gaze was serious. If you notice anything off, anything at all, come to me directly. We'll handle it quietly. Don't trust standard protocols, they might be compromised. And keep your toolbox logs safe. Whoever is behind this has no qualms about intimidation or blackmail. Leaving the security office, John felt a strange mix of relief and dread. At least his suspicions weren't dismissed, but the possibility of an internal spy raised the stakes. He took the elevator back to the maintenance floor, scanning each face with renewed caution. Could one of these smiling technicians be tampering with shipments, or was it someone higher up, orchestrating events from behind a polished desk? He found Annie elbow deep in a coding session with Kyle, the eager young engineer. They had commandeered a corner workstation, multiple screens displaying lines of diagnostic logs. Annie waved him over. "Dad, check this out. We found a hidden pattern in the timestamps of the shipments that arrived on weekends. It looks like someone artificially changed the date received to mask delays or early arrivals." Kyle pointed to the screen. "Notice how these batches skip a day or two, but the system logs claim it all arrived the same day. Why hide that unless the saboteur needed to slip certain parts in without them being noticed in real time?" John studied the data, pride welling up at Annie's growing expertise. She truly was a natural at problem solving, just like her mother. "Good work, both of you. Send a copy to Lieutenant Caswell. Offline. No official channels. We keep this tight." They nodded in agreement. Kyle looked determined. "I never liked how some of the management folks shrugged off safety. My dad's a pilot. If they jeopardize pilot and passenger lives for corporate gain, that's unforgivable." John patted the young engineer's shoulder. "Stick with us, young kid. We'll make sure they don't get away with it." It was well past normal quitting time by the time they all packed up. The hangar lights dimmed, and a hush settled over the floors. John escorted Annie to their apartment, keeping an eye on any suspicious vehicles. His mind churned with conspiracies and potential angles of attack. But for now, at least, he had allies: Annie, Monica, Caswell, even Kyle. The saboteur might have bigger resources, but John had something intangible: the unwavering conviction that no sabotage could withstand the united resolve of honest people. That night, around 10, John received a frantic phone call from Trina, Monica Pierce's assistant. Her voice shook with urgency. "Mr. Harrington, you need to come to the executive wing immediately. Ms. Pierce was in a late meeting with some board members, and something went wrong. Security locked the building down, and rumors are flying." John's heart lurched. "Is Monica all right?" Well, I'm not sure. One of the board members said she stepped out and never returned to the meeting. Security found her phone abandoned in a hallway. Please, just hurry." He grabbed his jacket and slipped into the living room. Annie had just emerged from brushing her teeth, hair damp, wearing pajamas. She looked at him questioningly. "Dad, what's going on?" He debated telling her to stay put, but quickly realized she'd never forgive him if something went wrong, and he left her in the dark. Monica might be in trouble. "There's a security lockdown at Win Aerotech. We have to head over. But you stay in the car." "Okay." Within 15 minutes, they arrived at the glass tower that served as the administrative center. The place looked deserted except for a cluster of security guards at the entrance, scanning IDs. John rushed forward, heart pounding. Annie followed close behind, refusing to stay in the car. Inside, the tension was palpable. The hallways were lit with emergency strips, and an alarm pulsed quietly. Trina spotted John and Annie, ushering them toward an executive conference room. "They're searching the building, but no sign of Miss Pierce yet," she said, voice trembling. "Martin Hale is saying this is a breach in protocol, that we're compromised." John took a steadying breath. "We have to stay calm. Are the cameras running? Can we check footage?" Trina shook her head. "The main camera feed is down. Tech support says it was deactivated from within our system. A pair of security guards hurried down a side corridor, walkie-talkies crackling. Caswell's voice emerged from the static. All units, be advised a forced entry was detected on the 19th floor server room. Proceed with caution. John and Annie exchanged a grim look. The server room? That's near where the digital logs are kept. Right, Annie asked. If the saboteur gained physical access, they could alter or destroy the evidence we've been collecting. Trina gulped. We also store advanced designs for the space propulsion project there. If someone wanted to sabotage it or steal the data, that'd be the place to do it. Without waiting, John sprinted for the nearest staircase, Annie at his heels. Stay behind me, he barked, but she didn't slow. As they descended, the stale air in the stairwell made every breath feel claustrophobic. The alarm buzzed louder as they approached the 19th floor landing. A single security guard was posted there, wide-eyed. Caswell told me to hold this position. She said, he's further in. John pressed on, heart hammering. They entered a corridor lit by red emergency lights. Doors lined the walls, each leading to a different server or data center. Each door secured by electronic keypad. One door stood ajar. The keypad ripped from the wall. The hair on John's arm stood on end. Inside, rows of server racks blinked in the dimness. Loose cabling snaked across the floor. Caswell knelt behind a large server, appearing to check for something. Then he looked up, relief passing over his face. John, you shouldn't be here. It's dangerous. Where's Monica? John demanded, scanning for any sign of her. Caswell shook his head. Haven't found her. We did find footprints leading out of here, but the cameras are offline. We suspect an intruder or an accomplice from within. He gestured to a flickering monitor. They wiped a ton of data system logs, design specs, probably took it on a portable drive. A cold dread settled in John's stomach. They took everything we've been working on, most of it, Caswell confirmed grimly. And we have no idea if Ms. Pierce was taken or if she's still hiding somewhere. Annie stepped forward. Wait, if they wiped everything digitally, that means the only comprehensive record of suspicious shipments and sabotage might be. John finished her sentence. In my old toolbox log, their eyes locked in understanding. Whoever orchestrated this had probably tried to ensure no trace remained of their wrongdoing. If Monica stumbled upon them mid-act, she could be in grave danger. In the aftermath of the break-in, Win Aerotech descended into organized chaos. The police arrived, roping off the floor with caution tape, interviewing anyone who might have seen or heard something. Technicians swarmed the server racks, trying to recover what they could of the compromised data. Lieutenant Caswell directed the search efforts, grim-faced as he reported that Monica's phone was found outside a locked conference room, but she was nowhere in sight. The possibility that she'd been abducted weighed heavily on everyone's minds. John took a seat on a plastic chair near the break room, head in his hands, trying to piece together the events. Annie paced nearby, chewing on her lip. Trina hovered, tears staining her cheeks. Martin Hale emerged from the stairwell, his expensive shoes tapping out a staccato rhythm on the tile. His expression flickered between anger and something else, fear. Perhaps this is an unmitigated disaster, Hale announced to no one in particular. The board is furious. We've had hush-hush investor discussions all week, and now we look incompetent, unable to protect our own headquarters, losing a top executive and possibly valuable trade secrets. Do you realize the blowback? John stood, stepping directly into Hale's path. People's lives are at stake, not just profits. Monica is missing. Doesn't that matter to you? Hale's jaw clenched. Of course it matters. But a company like Win Aerotech can't survive a meltdown in public confidence. We need to salvage the situation ASAP. The sabotage angles, the missing data, none of this can be allowed to go public. Annie blurted. We should go public. Let people know there's sabotage so they can watch out. Maybe even get tips or leads. Hale shot her a withering glance. This isn't a high school group project. Miss Harrington, Real consequences follow if we spook our investors. We must handle this internally. John fought to keep his temper. We handle it your way. We might never find Monica, or the saboteur could keep operating undercover. The truth is our best ally right now. Before an argument could explode, Caswell stepped in, pulling John aside. He shot a warning look at Hale. "We're not out of options yet," Caswell muttered under his breath. "I have my men sweeping the building, checking all exits. We'll see if the building's CCTV can be restored. In the meantime, you might want to check your personal log and see if there's any clue connecting Miss Pierce's disappearance to the shipments or sabotage patterns." John nodded. "I'll do that." His body felt like it was running on pure adrenaline, the emotional weight pressing down. Monica's last conversation had been about ramping up the search for saboteurs. Could she have cornered the culprit or stumbled upon them mid-heist? He tried not to imagine the worst scenario. Her strength of character had inspired trust in him, and now that trust was fueling a desperate need to find her alive and well, they made their way to the lower floors, Annie sticking close. As they passed a hallway near the security offices, a figure darted out of view. John's heart leapt, half expecting to see Monica, but it was only a startled junior accountant, rummaging through file boxes. The building felt haunted, its corridors tinged with fear and tension. At last, they reached John's corner of the maintenance bays. His battered old toolbox rested under a metal workbench, letting out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He crouched to unlock it. Inside were wrenches, pliers, specialized tools, and a thick, spiral notebook stuffed with scribbled notes, diagrams, shipping records he'd printed off, and short narratives of every suspicious incident he'd encountered. Annie peered over his shoulder as he flipped to the latest entries. "Let's see if anything here might indicate who wanted Monica out of the picture," John murmured. The overhead lights in the bay flickered for a moment, adding to the foreboding atmosphere. He tried to focus on the pages, scanning for any detail that might tie back to Hale, the suspicious shipments, or the phantom saboteur who'd orchestrated the break-in. But with the entire building on lockdown, every second felt like a countdown to another disaster. Page after page, John's handwritten notes revealed a mosaic of potential clues. He documented arrivals of faulty parts, the anomalies Annie found in system logs, confrontations with Martin Hale, and even Monica's hints about corporate espionage from rival aerospace giants. Annie took photos of each page with her phone, an offline record in case the saboteur tried to destroy the physical notebook. "The same vendor name shows up a lot," Annie noted, pointing to an entry about Starlift components. "They were flagged multiple times for late deliveries and questionable serial numbers." A cross-reference to the shipping logs revealed that each suspicious shipment arrived just before or after a major corporate event, like a press conference or board meeting, times when security was either distracted or scaled back. John frowned, remembering an earlier conversation with Monica. She said their expansions made Win Aerotech a prime target for those who do anything to sabotage new propulsion technology. If that vendor is a front for a rival company, or even a shell set up by an insider, these shipments might be their Trojan horses. Annie flipped to a more recent note, one John scribbled after the break-in was first discovered. "You wrote that Martin Hale had secret talks with an unidentified figure who left the building late at night. That was speculation." "Right," John shrugged. "I saw Hale escort someone out once. Could have been a consultant or a competitor. But the timing was odd after hours. No sign-in at the front desk. Could be nothing or everything." Suddenly, they heard footsteps echoing in the bay. A security guard appeared, breathless. "Caswell wants you to know they found Ms. Pierce's watch in a sub-basement corridor. It was smashed. No sign of her, though." The guard's voice cracked. "He says to stay put. Keep your evidence safe." A chill coursed through John. Monica's watch was a personal keepsake, so for her to drop it, smash it, things must have taken a dire turn. Annie's face went pale. "They're taking her deeper into the building," while John shook his head, heart pounding, because the sub-basement might be easier to slip in and out of. It leads to service tunnels that connect to the street or even next-door buildings. If the cameras are down, It's the perfect route for an abductor to escape unseen. With sudden resolve, Annie closed the notebook. Dad, we have to help. We can't just wait here. He exhaled hard, torn between fear for her safety and the knowledge that the clock was ticking for Monica. All right, he said finally, but we do this carefully, and we let Caswell know. We move in teams if possible. Annie nodded, clutching the notebook. As they exited the maintenance bay, the overhead lights seemed to dim further, as if the entire building was losing power or shutting down in stages. An ominous hush followed them into the corridor. Somewhere in this sprawling complex, a woman who had placed her trust in John was in danger, and so was the future of Win Aerotech's mission to revolutionize flight. He quickened his pace, scanning every intersection, every door, for signs of movement. This was no longer just about corporate sabotage, it was about saving a life, and possibly many more if the sabotage extended to the next generation of aircraft or rockets. Passing a large window, John glimpsed the city lights beyond. They flickered, reflecting the turmoil within. With tension coiling in his gut, he vowed that if the saboteur thought they could walk away with Monica and the stolen data, they were about to learn just how relentless an old mechanic and his resourceful daughter could be. John led the way through the dimly lit corridor, flashlight in hand, with Annie clutching his spiral notebook tightly behind him. Emergency lights cast an eerie red glow on the cement walls, and the steady drone of machinery echoed somewhere deep beneath them. They had ventured down 2 levels below the main basement, guided by a rough blueprint of the building's lower levels that John had found in a storage closet years older than Win Aerotech's current owners. Even as he clutched the blueprint, half of its markings were out of date, making the warren of subterranean tunnels confusing to navigate. Lieutenant Caswell and 2 security officers trailed them, guns drawn, prepared for the worst. The sub-basement was rarely used, originally constructed decades ago for older utility lines and storage. Now it served as a labyrinth of defunct electrical panels, disused mechanical rooms, and locked storage cages. The stale air stank of mildew and dust. John felt his pulse pounding in his ears, every nerve on high alert as they passed old signage, reading Boiler Access and Service Tunnel 3. They stopped at a heavy steel door, its paint peeling away from rusted hinges. A chain had been hastily yanked free, and faint scuff marks on the ground hinted that it had been forced open recently. Caswell signaled to the officers to fan out. The largest officer, a gruff ex-cop named Reyes, pushed the door inward, revealing an unlit chamber cluttered with discarded crates. At first glance, it looked empty. Then John heard the smallest sound, a soft scrape, like a shoe dragged across concrete, heart hammering. He flicked his flashlight beam around the room. In the far corner, behind a leaning stack of rotted wooden pallets, he saw the pale glow of a smartphone screen. He approached slowly. Annie right behind him. The light revealed a figure slumped on the ground, bound at the wrists, Monica Pierce. Her face was pale, hair disheveled, but relief flickered in her eyes the moment she recognized them. Caswell and Reyes rushed forward, cutting the restraints and helping her sit up. Monica winced, trying to speak. They took the data on an external drive, threatened me. Her voice cracked with exhaustion and a tremor of fear. I didn't see their faces, masks, but one of them used an ID card to get through the building's security doors. Someone on the inside. John offered her a sip from his canteen. Annie placed a comforting hand on Monica's shoulder. We'll get you out, Annie said softly. We've got evidence. Logs. We'll stop them. Monica mustered a shaky nod. Thank you. They mentioned a rival group, possibly a major competitor, but they were also planning to pin this on you. John, frame you as incompetent, slow, said something about forcing Win Aerotech's board to oust you and Ms. Pierce. We have to move fast. Exchanging glances, John and Caswell realized the plot ran deeper than they had imagined. It wasn't only about stealing technology, it was about discrediting Win Aerotech's safety measures to damage the company's future. If the saboteur had official credentials, They could walk freely throughout the building, plant any evidence they wanted, and vanish before morning. Outside, a distant clang reverberated in the tunnel. Somebody was on the move. Time was running out. They lifted Monica to her feet, determined to escort her back to the main floors. Whatever the saboteurs' next move, John knew they had to act decisively or risk losing everything, including the precious logs that pointed to the true villains behind the sabotage. Monica leaned against Caswell for support as they navigated the cramped corridors back toward the main building. John noticed how her breathing was shallow, her steps faltering. She'd been roughed up, though, how badly? He couldn't yet tell. Annie walked beside them, holding up the flashlight and trying to steady Monica when Caswell needed both hands for his weapon. The hallway ahead felt endless, each echo of their footsteps coming back at them from the darkness. Just a bit farther, John muttered, though he wasn't entirely sure how many more twists and turns they had left. The sub-basement's layout was notoriously inconsistent. Some sections had been sealed off or repurposed. The blueprint he carried was half useless, but he clung to it for what little orientation it provided. At the next junction, a pair of security officers stood guard, looking relieved at the sight of Monica alive. One officer radioed for immediate medical assistance to meet them upstairs. Monica tried to speak but coughed weakly. "We have to find that external drive. They said they'd destroy it once they finish transferring the info, or they might leak it to ruin Win Aerotech's reputation." John gave a curt nod. "We'll do whatever it takes. But first, you need to see the medics. We can't let them slip away, but we also can't leave you like this." Caswell signaled for the team to move quickly. The group split into two squads, one to escort Monica up and secure the area, the other led by John and Annie to continue searching for any sign of the saboteurs. Annie insisted on staying with her father. "I can help track them digitally if we find a console," she argued, gripping her phone as though it were a weapon. Soon, they reached a small security station near the freight elevator. It was deserted, the metal chair overturned. A flickering computer screen displayed a partial map of the sub-basement levels. Annie's eyes lit up. If the saboteurs are still down here, they might show up on the old sensor logs, provided they haven't wiped them yet. She typed furiously, scanning lines of code. John and Caswell kept watch, uneasy in the stale, humid air. After what felt like an eternity, Annie gasped. "Dad, look, motion sensors near the old incinerator room are still active. Something's moving there. Time-stamped just a minute ago." Her voice quivered with excitement and fear. "That's on the far side of the sub-basement, near those sealed corridors." Caswell drew a sharp breath. "If they're cornered there, they might destroy evidence. We can't let them burn or trash that drive, or do anything else to sabotage the building." John nodded, adrenaline surging anew. "Let's move," he said, flicking off the monitor. "We'll round them up, then meet Monica in the main tower. Annie, stay back if there's trouble. Don't risk yourself." But Annie gave him that familiar, determined look, the one that said there'd be no talking her out of this. If the saboteurs had come this far, they weren't going to let father-daughter sentiment stand in their way. Gripping his flashlight and bracing himself for a potential showdown, John signaled for Caswell to lead the way. At the back of his mind, he recalled the swirl of allegations and false stories pinned on him in the media. This was more than just corporate sabotage now. It was a fight for their reputations, their futures, and quite possibly their lives. They followed the corridor deeper underground, passing a rusted sign that read, "Incinerator, authorized personnel only." The stale air grew hotter and thicker, as if leftover heat from old machinery still simmered behind the walls. Caswell raised a hand to halt the group. He whispered, "I'll go first with Reyes. You two stay a few paces back. No heroics." "All right," John nodded, but his heart was pounding. Annie clutched the notebook close to her chest, phone in her other hand. This part of the sub-basement felt even more claustrophobic, low-hanging pipes, corroded metal scaffolding, and small puddles of condensation gathering on the floor. Their footsteps echoed ominously, announcing their approach to anyone inside. A door labeled Incinerator Control was slightly ajar. Through the gap, John heard hushed voices. Caswell signaled for silence, then pressed himself flat against the wall. Carefully, he angled his head just enough to see into the room. Reyes did the same from the opposite side. Then, without warning, a harsh voice barked from inside, "Don't move another step, or we torch everything, including you." John froze, so they knew. The saboteurs must have heard them coming. Annie's breathing quickened, and he placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. There was a flicker of movement inside, and the overhead lights revealed a masked figure hunched near a cluster of electronic devices. Something hissed a canister of fuel or some chemical accelerant. Another figure stood by a panel of servers, hooking cables into what looked like a portable hard drive. Caswell stepped partially into view, his firearm raised. "Drop the weapon and move away from the incinerator." His voice echoed. The masked figure near the servers let out a mirthless laugh. "Drop our weapon? Why don't you drop your illusions? Officer, you're outnumbered, and we're out of time." Before anyone could react, the masked saboteur by the incinerator flung a small object onto a pile of boxes. Sparks erupted, igniting the flammable material. In seconds, flames licked the edges of the cardboard, threatening to spread. Reyes lunged forward, kicking over the boxes to prevent the fire from climbing higher. The second saboteur moved toward the door, brandishing a firearm. Gunshots rang out. Caswell returning fire, the bullets ricocheting off metal. John pulled Annie back, pressing her against the wall for cover. Fear pulsed through him, but he refused to turn and run. If these saboteurs escaped with Win Aerotech's data and unleashed further sabotage, everything they fought for would collapse. Summoning courage, he peeked around the corner to see Caswell pinned behind a large metal panel, exchanging sporadic fire with the armed saboteur. The other masked figure was desperately typing on a laptop, presumably finishing the data transfer. Annie tugged at John's arm. "Dad, if we let them burn everything, the entire basement might go up. The incinerator's old. We have to get them away from that control panel." Her voice shook, but her eyes were resolute. She motioned toward a set of large, outdated valves connected to an overhead sprinkler system. If they could trigger the sprinklers, maybe they could douse the flames before it spread. But who knew if those valves still worked after years of neglect? Nodding in understanding, John prepared to slip in while Caswell kept the saboteurs distracted. Every fiber of his being roared that this was insane charging into a near-combat zone. But there was no time for second-guessing. With a last glance at Annie, he murmured, "Stay safe, kid," and braced himself for the risky move that might save them all. John sprinted across the open threshold, adrenaline fueling every stride. The saboteur near the server stack swung a gun toward him, but Caswell seized the distraction, popping off 2 shots that clanged off metal beams overhead. John slid behind a row of rusted incinerator machinery, the old metal squealing under his weight. Heat from the small fire behind him radiated through the floor, intensifying the suffocating environment. Glancing upward, he spotted the network of pipes overhead. One large valve, painted a fading red, seemed connected to an emergency sprinkler system. He prayed it was still operational. Getting to it, though, meant exposing himself in the crossfire. The saboteur with the gun was pinned, but not out of the fight. From behind the incinerator, John saw glimpses of the second saboteur, yanking cables from a battered console, clearly preparing to flee with some kind of portable storage device. Sparks from the growing fire danced around them, and the smell of burning plastic filled the air. Annie, meanwhile, had taken cover behind the door, her phone in hand. She called out to Reyes, "Is there any shutoff for the incinerator's fuel line?" He shouted back that the system was defunct, replaced decades ago, but the old piping might still be feeding residual gas. In other words, if the flames spread to that line, the entire place could become an inferno. Caswell inched forward, exchanging another burst of gunfire with the armed saboteur. "We've called for backup," he bellowed. "It's over, drop your weapon." The only response was a mocking laugh, followed by more bullets clanging off metal. Amid the chaos, the second saboteur hissed, "We've got what we need. Let's move." John realized time was running out. The saboteurs would either slip away through another exit or blow this place sky high. Steeling himself, he crawled along the floor, using the incinerator's bulk as cover. Heat singed his arms through his shirt, and he could feel sweat pouring down his face. Finally, he reached the base of a ladder that led to the overhead valve. One rung at a time, he ascended, heart pounding in his ears. Sparks rained down from the ceiling, mixing with the acrid smoke swirling in the cramped space. He wrapped one hand around the rusted valve, straining with all his might to turn it. It refused to budge. A flicker of panic threatened to overwhelm him. This had to work. Putting all his strength into it, he heaved again, feeling the valve's corroded metal break loose. Slowly, it groaned into motion, turning with a nerve-wracking squeal. Somewhere in the pipe system overhead, water shuddered. Then, with a jolt, the sprinkler heads burst to life, raining tepid water across the entire chamber. Steam erupted where the water met fire, obscuring visibility. Shouts rang out as the saboteur's weapons sputtered uselessly in the downpour. The blaze nearest the incinerator began to fizzle and pop, starved of oxygen as water drenched the cardboard and crates. John remained perched on the ladder, gasping for air, every muscle trembling from the exertion. Through the haze, he saw the second saboteur backing toward a side door, clutching the data drive. If they escaped now, the sabotage wasn't over. Annie's voice cut through the din. "Dad, they're running, summoning a last reserve of energy." John slid down the ladder. In the swirling steam, gunshots erupted again. He braced himself for the possibility of a direct confrontation. This was it, the final push to stop them. He only hoped Caswell and Reyes could handle the armed saboteur, while he and Annie cornered the data thief. Failure here meant everything they'd fought for would be lost, spluttering in the artificial downpour. John locked eyes with Annie, who was crouched by the door. Her soaked hair clung to her face, and her shoulders trembled from the tension. But her gaze was unwavering. "Dad." "The second saboteur's heading northeast. There's a corridor leading out of the incinerator wing." John gave Caswell a quick nod, trusting the lieutenant to keep the armed assailant busy. He raced after Annie into a narrow side passage. The old concrete walls dripped, water pooling around their feet. Each step was a hazard, the floor slick from the sprinkler deluge. But they pressed on, guided by faint thuds of frantic footsteps echoing through the labyrinth of tunnels. They turned a corner and saw the saboteur up ahead, still masked, soaked, and clutching a small black hard drive. The figure glanced back, swore, and broke into a sprint. John's heart hammered as he forced his tired legs to accelerate. Annie matched his pace, her face set with grim determination. "Stop!" she shouted, voice echoing off the damp walls. Her words were met with silence. Suddenly, a heavy door slammed shut between them and their quarry. A metallic clang signaled the saboteur had locked it from the other side. John yanked on the handle, but it refused to budge. "Hold on," Annie said, quickly searching for a control panel or emergency release. She found one by the doorframe, an older mechanical latch system. With deft fingers, she removed a small screwdriver from her father's tool belt and pried off the panel cover. Inside were wires, dials, and a corroded lever. "Can you open it?" John asked, glancing over his shoulder. They didn't have much time before the saboteur vanished into the warren of basement corridors, possibly leading outside or into an area with direct street access. "I'll try," Annie muttered, biting her lip. She manipulated the lever, carefully pushing it clockwise. Metal ground against metal, and they heard a dull click. The door hissed slightly, its lock mechanism releasing. John wrenched it open, stepping through into a narrower tunnel that angled upward. The saboteur was nowhere in sight, but wet footprints marked the path. They followed the prints up a short flight of concrete steps. The air here was cooler, suggesting an exterior vent or exit. John's lungs burned from the chase, but he pressed on, ignoring the ache in his legs. Each second felt like a countdown to the saboteur's escape and a total corporate meltdown. Annie clutched the spiral notebook, the only surviving evidence of the sabotage timeline. If that data drive fell into the wrong hands or was destroyed, Win Aerotech might be crippled for good. At the top of the steps, a steel hatch led to what looked like an old storage yard beyond the building. The latch was unhooked, left ajar by the fleeing intruder. John pushed it open, wincing as bright streetlights assaulted his eyes. They emerged into a fenced-off area behind the main complex, scattered with abandoned crates and defunct machinery. The city skyline glittered on the horizon. Rain still fell in sheets, mixing with the spray from the sprinklers that had traveled through the sub-basement vents. "There," Annie whispered, pointing to a shape darting behind a rusted shipping container. John narrowed his eyes, spotting the saboteur's silhouette. Summoning a final burst of resolve, he and Annie sprinted across the sloshing ground. The masked figure paused momentarily, perhaps contemplating an ambush, then suddenly leapt out, brandishing a crowbar. John skidded to a halt, instinctively pushing Annie behind him. He raised his hands in a defensive stance, adrenaline spiking again. This confrontation would not be decided by stealth or cunning. It would be brute force, man against saboteur, father protecting daughter, the fate of an entire company at stake. Lightning flashed overhead, illuminating the makeshift battleground behind Win Aerotech's tower. The saboteur, tall, wiry, and still masked, circled John with the crowbar poised. Rain pelted them, and water dripped from the saboteur's hood, making the figure's features impossible to discern. Annie hovered several steps behind her dad, the open notebook in her grip, eyes darting for any advantage. John squared his shoulders, every muscle tense. He was nearing 60, but a lifetime of physical labor and a stint in the Air Force gave him enough grit to stand his ground. "Drop it," he growled, voice gruff. "No one else needs to get hurt." "Hand over the drive." The saboteur let out a low, mocking chuckle. "Like you stand a chance," came a distorted voice, filtered by some device in the mask. Without warning, the saboteur lunged. John sidestepped, blocking with his left forearm. Pain jolted up his arm as metal met flesh. He grimaced but held firm, using his body weight to shove the attacker off balance. They staggered, slipping on the soaked pavement. Annie took a step forward, heart in her throat. She wanted to help, but the crowbar was a deadly weapon, and her father had explicitly told her to hang back unless there was no choice. The saboteur recovered quickly, feinting left before swinging right. John barely dodged in time, the crowbar scraping along the side of a defunct forklift with a harsh screech. He seized the opening to slam his shoulder into the saboteur's chest, driving them into a stack of pallets. The masked assailant grunted, momentarily pinned. In the swirl of relentless rain, John's grip slipped. The saboteur twisted, driving an elbow into his ribs. John recoiled, gasping, and the saboteur darted free. Crowbar raised again. A flash of lightning revealed the stolen hard drive clipped to the saboteur's belt. This was the moment the difference between Win Aerotech's downfall or salvation. Summoning a surge of fatherly protectiveness, John focused on disarming the attacker. If he could just wrench that crowbar away, he might end this. He managed to block the next blow, hooking the crowbar's handle under his own forearm in a textbook disarm technique. His free hand grappled for the saboteur's wrist, desperate to pry the weapon loose. They strained against each other, breath ragged, slipping in the puddles of water and mud. Suddenly, a gloved hand found John's hair and yanked his head back violently. Blinding pain lanced through his skull. He lost his grip for a split second, enough for the saboteur to break free. From behind, Annie cried out, "Dad!" Her voice cracked with panic. John had no time to respond. The saboteur capitalized, swinging the crowbar at John's unguarded side. White-hot agony exploded in his shoulder as the metal connected. He stumbled to one knee, vision swimming. The saboteur hovered over him, weapon raised for a finishing strike. In that instant, Annie's fear transmuted into fierce resolve. Without hesitation, she charged, slamming the spiral notebook against the saboteur's mask and grabbing for the crowbar. The attacker staggered from the surprise. John, seizing the distraction, mustered every last ounce of strength to dive forward, driving his shoulder into the saboteur's midsection. The crowbar flew from their grasp, clattering across the asphalt. For a heartbeat, all three were a tangle of limbs. The saboteur tried to scramble upright, but John locked an arm around their legs, forcing them down. Annie snatched the hard drive from the saboteur's belt. A guttural shout echoed in the downpour. The masked figure flailed, smashing a hand into John's face, but the blow lacked precision. John kept his hold, determined not to let them slip away. At last, the fight drained from the saboteur, pinned hard beneath John's weight. Sirens wailed in the distance, reinforcements finally on the way. Annie stepped back, trembling, the stolen drive in her hand. Rain hammered them all, the final testament to the chaotic night. But for the first time in hours, John felt a surge of triumph. They had the evidence, and the saboteur was cornered. Now all that remained was unmasking the face behind it. Moments later, the floodlights of Win Aerotech's on-site security vehicles and local police cruisers cut through the storm. Officers arrived in force, their flashlights dancing across the sodden yard as they converged on the commotion. Caswell led a handful of guards, guns holstered now that the threat was subdued. Through sheets of pouring rain, he jogged over to John and Annie. "Good God," Caswell muttered, helping John wrench the saboteur's arms behind their back. "You all right?" John panted, battered and soaked. "I'll live," he rasped, relinquishing his hold to let the officers cuff the saboteur's wrists. Annie stood off to the side, hugging the notebook and the retrieved data drive close to her chest. She looked both terrified and relieved, her eyes flicking between her father and the masked figure struggling against the handcuffs. "Mask off," another officer demanded. The saboteur spat a curse, trying to twist away, but two burly cops held them firm. Caswell reached down, unclasping the mask strap. As it peeled away, the subdued figure's identity came into sharp focus, a young man, perhaps in his early 30s, with sharp features and cold, defiant eyes. He bore no immediate resemblance to any Win Aerotech employee John recognized. With the voice distorter gone, he was ominously silent. "Who are you?" Caswell pressed. "Who do you work for?" The man sneered, blood trickling from a split lip. "You'll never pin anything on me that sticks. I was under orders. Same as you. Might as well call your lawyers now." Despite his bravado, John sensed fear lurking beneath his bravado. Possibly he believed a well-funded backer would bail him out. An ambulance arrived to assess John's injuries, but he waved off the stretcher, insisting the paramedics look after others first. "Monica Pierce. She was found in the sub-basement," he said, sucking in a painful breath. "Is she okay?" A paramedic nodded. "She's upstairs with medical staff. Might have a concussion, some bruises, but she should recover. They're monitoring her closely." Caswell, phone in hand, stepped aside to coordinate with additional responding units. The yard was a flurry of activity, now officers searching the perimeter. Win Aerotech employees gawking from loading dock entrances, camera phones out, capturing every angle of the scene. Annie approached John, wiping rain from her face. "Dad, you need to let them check you out. That crowbar hit looked bad." John forced a smile, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Soon, kiddo. First, let me see that drive." She handed over the small black device, which glinted under the floodlights. He turned it over, noting a faint manufacturer label half scratched away. This might contain the stolen data, sabotage logs, maybe even communications with the real puppeteers behind all this. Annie nodded gravely. "We can cross-reference it with your toolbox logs. If we find the chain of who gave this guy orders, it might lead us to the top." A swirl of emotions overcame John's exhaustion. Relief, pride in his daughter's bravery. For all the chaos, they had managed to prevent the saboteurs from torching the basement, and they'd rescued Monica Pierce. He winced, a fresh wave of pain radiating from his shoulder. I guess we've earned ourselves a trip to the hospital, then to a nice, long interrogation. As if on cue, two more police officers arrived to escort the captured saboteur away. The man cast a venomous glare at John and Annie before being shoved into a waiting patrol car. Whatever illusions of an easy escape he'd had were gone. John exhaled, passing the data drive to Caswell for safekeeping as paramedics finally insisted he sit on a gurney. Annie hovered at his side, tears mixing with raindrops. John allowed himself a moment of vulnerability, reaching for her hand. "You did good, Annie. Real good." In that fleeting moment, father and daughter both realized the gravity of what they'd been swept into. The sabotage was bigger than one masked criminal. It might trace back to powerful people, possibly even within Win Aerotech itself. But they had each other. They had evidence, and they had an unwavering determination not to let truth be buried. The storm raged on, but John no longer felt powerless. For now, at least, they had a fighting chance. Early the next morning, John found himself sitting in a hospital bed with his arm in a sling, battered but not broken. Painkillers dulled the sharpest edges of his injuries, but every movement still sent jolts through his bruised shoulder. Annie perched on a nearby chair, half asleep after a night of questions and official statements. A swirl of emotions lingered between them: fear, pride, relief. A knock on the hospital room door announced Lieutenant Caswell and Monica Pierce. Monica wore a thick bandage on her temple, her complexion still pale, but she managed a smile. "Glad to see you upright," she said softly, stepping inside. "We owe you a lot." John sat up straighter, wincing. "We owe Annie, too. She's the one who's been bridging the gap between old-school inspection and new-school data tracking. Without her, that saboteur might have gotten away." He glanced at his daughter, who blushed under the praise. In truth, she had handled herself with remarkable courage. Charging a dangerous criminal was something no teenager should ever have to do, yet she'd done it without hesitation. Caswell cleared his throat. "We also have news. The saboteur we caught refuses to talk, but we recovered some partial communications from that data drive. It looks like he was in contact with multiple shell companies, some possibly tied to high-ranking individuals within Win Aerotech or a rival firm. Our suspicion about an inside job remains strong. The sabotage might involve corporate espionage from a direct competitor, or someone wanting to short Win Aerotech stock by creating a public fiasco." Monica's jaw tightened. "I've already scheduled an emergency board meeting. We'll present the evidence, John's logs, the data from the drive, and the sabotage patterns. The board must commit to a full internal investigation, no matter where it leads." John exchanged a significant look with Annie. They both recalled Martin Hale's scathing remarks and suspicious behavior. "Martin's at the top of my suspect list," John confessed. "He's been resistant to thorough inspections from day one, pushing for minimal safety checks. Could be just corporate arrogance, but it fits a sabotage narrative, too." Monica crossed her arms. "Thoughtful. Hale's a key figure in Win Aerotech, controlling large segments of operations. Exposing him would rock the foundation of this place, but if he's guilty, we have no choice." Her gaze dropped, and she spoke more quietly. "It won't be easy. Hale has allies. He's cunning. But we have truth on our side." Annie piped up, voice subdued but resolute. "We're prepared to testify or show our data. We just want to ensure that whoever orchestrated this can't keep hurting people. Planes can crash. Lives can be lost. This isn't just about corporate drama." Caswell nodded, setting a folder on John's bedside table. "We'll continue analyzing the data drive. For now, rest up. Win Aerotech is in crisis mode. The press is running wild with half-truths, but we're keeping the kidnapping incident under wraps until we can confirm the extent of the conspiracy." Monica approached John and gently rested a hand on his uninjured shoulder. "We'll get through this. You brought integrity to a place that sometimes forgets what it means. Don't doubt for a second that you've made a difference." It was a rare moment of warmth and solidarity. In the quiet hum of the hospital room, they all recognized the looming challenges. They had a lead on the saboteur network, but unmasking powerful players like Martin Hale could prove far more difficult than wrestling a single masked criminal in a storm-lashed yard. Yet the bond forged by adversity between John, Annie, Monica, and Caswell felt solid as steel. No matter what came next, they would face it head-on, armed with evidence and an unwavering commitment to real safety and honest labor. Within 48 hours, Win Aerotech's emergency board meeting convened in a vast, glass-walled conference hall on the top floor of the corporate tower. The night's chaos had given way to daylight's clarity, though tension still clung to every corridor. Investors and senior executives filed in, wearing grim expressions. Even the usual background chatter was subdued, replaced by hushed speculation about kidnappings, sabotage, and the wild rumors swirling online. John arrived with Annie, his arm still in a sling, escorted by Lieutenant Caswell and Monica Pierce. Their presence in the boardroom turned heads immediately: the battered mechanic, his teen daughter, the security chief, and a bruised top executive, none of them typical participants in such a high-level meeting. At the imposing oval table, men and women in tailored suits exchanged uncertain glances. Martin Hale stood off to one side, flipping through documents with feigned calm. His expression remained unreadable, though a hint of tension around his eyes suggested he was feeling the pressure. Board chairwoman Beverly Stokes, an older woman with impeccably styled white hair and an aura of commanding authority, rapped a gavel. "We'll skip formalities. This meeting is called to address the critical allegations of sabotage, kidnapping, and data theft within Win Aerotech. Ms. Pierce, you may begin." Monica stepped forward, posture still stiff from her injuries, but her voice unwavering. She recounted the timeline of events: suspicious shipments, infiltration of system logs, her own abduction, and the eventual confrontation in the sub-basement. She cited John's manual inspection records and Annie's data analysis as key to uncovering the sabotage. Whenever she mentioned John, a few of the more skeptical board members eyed him as though evaluating a bizarre wild card in their polished corporate world. Then Caswell took the floor. "We have proof," he said, distributing copies of a report detailing the sabotage patterns. Included are partial communications recovered from the seized drive, several references to internal scheduling shifts orchestrated to facilitate the sabotage. The infiltration was meticulous, and we believe the conspirators had at least one high-level contact feeding them security codes and technical data. Possibly more. Martin Hale chose this moment to interrupt. "Lieutenant Caswell, while I appreciate your thoroughness, let's not point fingers without concrete evidence of who that insider might be. Win Aerotech's processes are expansive. Many could manipulate logs or shipments." John felt Annie stiffen beside him. Before Caswell could reply, Monica introduced John and Annie. "No one has done more to expose the sabotage. John, please speak about your findings." Stepping to the front, John felt every eye in the room fix on him. He held a thick binder printouts of his spiral notebook logs and supplemental data. "I'm no corporate executive," he began, voice steady despite his discomfort. "But I know machines, and I know when someone's messing with them. From the day I arrived, I noticed patterns in shipping anomalies. Every time Win Aerotech scheduled a major press conference or demonstration, we'd get a batch of subpar parts from the same vendor. Starlift components. We also recorded inexplicable maintenance errors popping up in the digital logs." He passed out copies of the relevant pages. My daughter, Annie, cross-referenced them with the building's internal access logs. "We found repeated adjustments in the system. Someone was resetting timestamps and forging electronic signatures. That can't be an outside job alone. Someone here had to be providing the access." Hale cleared his throat, plastering on a tight smile. "You claim an inside source. Let's see actual proof that it's not just random technical glitches." His tone dripped with condescension. John met his gaze. "We have partial email chains pointing to an account controlled by an unnamed executive. We also have timestamps matching your office activity. Mr. Hale." The room hushed. "They're incomplete, but suspicious enough to warrant a deeper forensic audit. A flush crept up Hale's neck, though he smirked. And if a single staffer used my credentials, that's hardly proof of my involvement. I'd caution the board against a witch hunt. The tension peaked, and Chairwoman Stokes signaled for calm. Mr. Hale, Miss Pierce, we will form an investigative subcommittee to thoroughly examine the evidence. If wrongdoing is found at any level, Win Aerotech will take swift action. In the meantime, all key logs and shipments will be placed under full lockdown. No one manipulates anything without direct board approval. An uneasy hush lingered as the meeting concluded. John exhaled, letting the binder drop to his side. This wasn't the definitive victory he hoped for. Hale remained unscathed, protected by corporate procedure, but at least they'd gained the board's attention. As people filed out, Monica gave him a discreet nod. One step at a time, she whispered. We'll keep at it. The truth is on our side. Despite the board's cautious response, a charged undercurrent ran through Win Aerotech in the days that followed. Word about Monica's abduction and John's dramatic confrontation with the saboteur filtered through the ranks. Whispers circulated that an entire espionage ring might be lurking within the organization. Employees eyed each other warily in hallways. Morale dipped, overshadowed by suspicion. Monica stayed busy orchestrating the official investigation. Every department head was required to turn over system logs and internal memos for scrutiny. Caswell's security team combed through camera feeds, cross-referencing building entries at odd hours. Meanwhile, John received an influx of support from the maintenance teams. Some had previously doubted the old-fashioned methods, but after hearing how his diligence exposed sabotage, they hailed him as a hero. Kyle, the eager young engineer, even organized a small group to help Annie refine the predictive maintenance software, aiming to catch any future sabotage attempts before they fully manifested. Yet tension also simmered in corners of the organization. A few longtime employees openly griped that the negative publicity was tarnishing Win Aerotech's brand. Others quietly resented John for airing the company's dirty laundry. Rumors pointed to Martin Hale orchestrating these pockets of dissent, subtly painting John as an overzealous crusader, jeopardizing delicate investor relations. While most staff recognized something nefarious had happened, some simply wanted to shove it under the rug and move on. Annie tried to focus on her STEM Academy classes, but the swirl of intrigue at Win Aerotech consumed her thoughts. She found it difficult to relate to classmates whose biggest worries were homework deadlines. Late one evening, she joined John in a quiet corner of the hangar. They stood by a half-assembled jet engine, listening to the hum of advanced diagnostic equipment. I'm worried, Annie said, voice low. If Hale's really pulling the strings, can we pin it on him definitively? He's so slick in those board meetings. John wiped a smear of grease from his good hand onto a rag. We only need one mistake, one slip that ties him to the sabotage beyond doubt. He sighed, glancing at his battered arm in the sling. Right now, we're stuck in a corporate web, forced to tiptoe through protocols. That's not exactly my style. They shared a grim smile. The father-daughter duo, after everything, remained anchored by their love for each other and the memory of Sarah, whose photo adorned John's makeshift locker. He sometimes wondered what his late wife would make of this labyrinthine battle against corporate intrigue. Probably she'd remind him to keep pushing, keep believing that truth would surface. At that moment, Kyle hurried over, excitement lighting his eyes. Mr. Harrington, Annie, you need to see this. He waved a data tablet. We ran a deep trace on that shell vendor, Starlift Components. The business address leads to a vacant lot in New Jersey, but the phone number is registered under a name that matches a partial identity in the data drive. He paused, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. I did some extra digging. The same contact shows up in Win Aerotech's procurement logs for specialized rocket components. That means they had high-level clearance, possibly signed off by a single executive with top-tier approval authority. John's eyes sharpened. That kind of authority would be limited to a handful of people at the top, the CEO, CFO, or the VP of operations. Kyle nodded gravely. Exactly. And the CFO's digital signature is nowhere on it. Monica Pierce co-signed some deals, but not for rocket components. That leaves Martin Hale as the only exec with direct involvement in these Starlift purchases. Annie clenched her fists, a surge of triumph illuminating her features. That's it. Dad, we can nail him now. We just have to present this evidence properly. John's chest tightened. If Kyle's research was solid, they had the missing link, a direct paper trail from Hale to the shell vendor orchestrating sabotage. However, Hale wouldn't go down without a fight. They needed the board to see the evidence under official scrutiny, and that meant prepping for a final confrontation that could shatter the company's facade of harmony. 2 mornings later, Monica Pierce convened a follow-up board session, this time with stricter security. Badge scanners required dual authorization at every door, and Caswell's team hovered near the conference wing like sentinels. The tension in the building crackled like static electricity before a thunderstorm. Martin Hale arrived promptly, wearing an immaculate suit and a mask of confidence. He eyed John, Annie, and Kyle with thinly veiled contempt as they entered the boardroom together. Chairwoman Stokes presided at the head of the long table, her expression grave. Once everyone was seated, Monica began. Over the past days, we've discovered critical evidence linking sabotage incidents to internal approval processes. Kyle Peterson, one of our engineers, led the data analysis. Mr. Harrington and Annie Harrington provided the original logs. Lieutenant Caswell corroborated the chain of custody. She indicated each person in turn. Hale leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "Let's see this smoking gun then," he said, almost casually. A smirk tugged at his lips, as if daring them to try. Kyle stood, nerves evident, but he cleared his throat and proceeded. He projected the procurement data on a large screen: purchase orders, shipping manifests, and digital signatures authorized by M. Hale. A hush spread around the table. Kyle highlighted the repeated instances of Starlift components, pointing out the exact codes that matched the sabotage timeline. "This is absurd," Hale snapped, rising to his feet. "Anyone could have faked my signature. Don't forget we have an entire department managing digital approvals. You think I personally punch in every code?" John exchanged a look with Monica. They had anticipated this defense. Monica stepped forward, pressing a button on the display. "We also have internal memo transcripts. Emails from your corporate account to a private contact at Starlift, discussing covert shipping and referencing the sabotage of certain projects to force Win Aerotech's timeline to slip. The language is explicit enough. We can confirm these memos originated from your terminal, using your unique physical keycard timestamps." Several board members gasped softly. A vein in Hale's temple throbbed. Memos easily fabricated by a cunning saboteur. "My keycard could have been cloned. I don't see any proof that I personally typed those messages. You're scapegoating me because your new pet mechanic bungled his job." Annie's temper flared, and she stepped forward despite John's cautionary glance. "We've matched the writing style in those memos to your other emails over the past year. Same phrasing, idioms, even punctuation quirks. It's not random. You used your card at hours no one else was in the building. We have camera footage from a corridor near your office, showing you entering seconds before the memos were sent." Monica nodded, her voice steely. "Mr. Hale, all of us wanted to believe there was a misunderstanding, but this is too conclusive to ignore. Sabotaging our supply chain with substandard parts, orchestrating that sabotage fiasco at the local airstrip, framing John Harrington to look incompetent, even kidnapping me to maintain the cover-up. These are monstrous acts." Hale's face turned red as he fumbled for a retort, but the weight of evidence pressed in, an avalanche of data that he hadn't expected them to piece together so completely. Chairwoman Stokes lifted a hand to forestall further argument. "Mr. Hale, you're hereby suspended from all duties pending a full external audit. Lieutenant Caswell will ensure your immediate surrender of Win Aerotech property, including ID and system access." A flicker of panic surfaced in Hale's eyes. He slammed a fist on the table. "You fools have no idea what you're doing. If Win Aerotech collapses under incompetent leadership, Don't blame me. With that, he stormed toward the exit, but a pair of security officers barred his path. The boardroom fell silent, the tension so thick it was palpable. John felt Annie's hand slip into his, trembling with a rush of vindication and relief. They had unmasked the insider, though the repercussions would be immense. Monica faced the board, exhaling slowly. "We'll cooperate fully with law enforcement. This ordeal could stain Win Aerotech's reputation, but we'll rebuild on honest principles, not sabotage." A solemn hush followed as Hale was escorted out, ranting threats that echoed down the hallway. John and Annie stood at the center of it all, battered but triumphant, aware that the fight was not entirely over. Legal battles, public relations nightmares, and lingering saboteur networks might remain, but the darkest shadow, the internal betrayal, had at last been dragged into the light. In the weeks that followed Martin Hale's dramatic downfall, Win Aerotech underwent a sweeping internal overhaul. Investigations extended across every department, uprooting minor conspirators who had collaborated with Hale or blindly followed his directives. The media seized upon the story, labeling Hale as a rogue executive who undermined his own company for profit and influence. Rumors swirled that he had ties to a rival aerospace giant aiming to sabotage Win Aerotech's ambitious space tourism venture. Despite the flood of negative headlines, public sentiment began shifting once Monica Pierce and Chairwoman Stokes released a candid statement. They acknowledged the sabotage, praised John Harrington's role in uncovering it, and assured stakeholders that Win Aerotech would double down on safety and transparency. Footage of John and Annie braving the night to rescue Monica and apprehend the saboteur found its way onto news networks, casting them as heroic figures. Some skeptics questioned whether Win Aerotech orchestrated a PR spin, but most recognized genuine courage when they saw it. Monica, now interim VP of Operations, personally requested John to remain as Chief Maintenance Supervisor. They restructured his role to include more authority over parts procurement, ensuring no suspicious components slipped through the cracks again. Annie, for her part, balanced her STEM Academy studies with assisting Win Aerotech's R&D team, applying her coding skills to strengthen system security. Kyle, similarly recognized for his contributions, was promoted to a new data analysis position, a testament to how quickly fortunes could turn in a crisis. Yet not everything returned to harmony overnight. The sabotage had caused real damage, significant project delays, financial losses, and ongoing legal woes. Martin Hale awaited a high-profile trial, refusing to cooperate with prosecutors. Through his lawyers, he claimed he was a scapegoat for corporate mismanagement. Insiders speculated he might attempt a plea deal if he could expose bigger players in the sabotage ring, like those shady shell companies or the black market suppliers. Each new rumor reawakened old anxieties within Win Aerotech's corridors. Amid the tumult, John found solace in the daily grind of honest work. He roamed the maintenance bays, personally training staff on thorough inspection techniques, ensuring every bolt was accounted for. The environment felt renewed, as if the team had collectively survived a life-or-death trial and come out stronger. Pilots, mechanics, and engineers approached him with newfound respect, eager to learn from the man who had risked so much to safeguard their company. Annie thrived on two, shining in her advanced classes and making new friends among the teen interns. She and Kyle collaborated on a software extension that combined her robotics club algorithms with real-time sensor data from aircraft in flight. The results astonished the engineering team, cutting detection times for mechanical faults by half. One evening, as John and Annie returned to their high-rise apartment, they found themselves smiling at the city lights. No longer feeling out of place, the sense of belonging was growing, as though Win Aerotech's diverse environment had woven them into its tapestry. Still, they couldn't shake the memories of sub-basement corridors, sabotage attempts, and the feral desperation in Hale's eyes as he was dragged away. Sometimes in quiet moments, John replayed it all, thankful that no one else had died or faced irreparable harm. He carried a subtle ache in his shoulder, a reminder of that crowbar strike. But that physical scar paled compared to the knowledge that powerful, hidden forces had nearly destroyed them. For now, at least, they had won a reprieve. A crisp Saturday morning found John back at the old Harrington Arrow hangar, accompanied by Annie. They had driven out early, deciding it was time to check on their original home and see old friends after the chaos in New York. The place smelled of nostalgia dust, engine oil, and farmland air. The faded sign still bore the family name, though some letters had begun to peel. The same battered chairs and half-finished coffee mugs remained by the service desk. Nothing had changed, yet everything felt different. Neighbors flocked in as soon as they heard John was back. Their warm welcomes and neighborly chatter wrapped father and daughter in a comforting familiarity. Mrs. June from down the road brought homemade pie, fussing over John's shoulder injury with motherly concern. Old man Dexter arrived on his rickety golf cart, offering unsolicited aviation tips as though John had forgotten everything. Annie giggled at how quickly they fell back into the local routine. Word of Martin Hale's arrest had traveled even to this rural pocket of the country, and the townsfolk peppered John with questions. He answered politely, explaining in broad strokes how sabotage nearly destroyed Win Aerotech, but was thwarted by persistent digging and a bit of old-fashioned grit. Some folks asked if John would reopen Harrington Arrow. He admitted he wasn't sure yet. He had obligations in New York, and Win Aerotech needed his expertise more than ever. A hush fell when they reached the old maintenance bay. Annie surveyed the dust-coated equipment, memories flooding back of countless afternoons spent handing wrenches to her dad. She found a stack of Polaroid photos, her younger self beaming beside half-repaired planes, her mother smiling from behind. Tears pricked Annie's eyes, a bittersweet pang at how life had changed. Sensing her melancholy, John placed a hand on her shoulder. "We did good, kiddo," he said softly. "Your mom would be proud. I know I am. We took a huge risk moving to Win Aerotech, but we stopped something terrible. Hard to imagine that place without us now." Annie nodded, wiping her cheek. "I'm glad we came back to see this, though. It reminds me how far we've come, and that we shouldn't lose where we started." They spent the next couple of hours clearing cobwebs, dusting off tool racks, and checking on the structural integrity of the hangar. At some point, a conversation sparked about possibly turning Harrington Arrow into a satellite training facility for Win Aerotech's up-and-coming mechanics. The idea excited Annie. What if local kids could learn aviation basics here, under John's guidance, then transition to bigger prospects in the city by late afternoon? The golden sun poured through the open hangar doors, painting everything in warm light. The father-daughter duo sat on a wooden crate, savoring the quiet. For a fleeting moment, time seemed suspended just as it had been in the simpler days before sabotage, kidnappings, and corporate drama. The hush was broken only by the distant hum of a single-engine Cessna overhead. John inhaled deeply, letting the sweet rural air fill his lungs. "We'll figure out the next steps," he murmured. "No rush. We've still got plenty of fight left in us, and plenty of good to do both here and in the city." Annie nodded, leaning her head on his good shoulder. Together, they watched the plane's silhouette cross the sky, feeling the unbreakable bond of family and the pull of destiny that had led them to protect the wider world of aviation. Back in New York the following week, Win Aerotech held a celebratory event to mark its renewed commitment to safety and innovation. The massive hangar where John had first clashed with Martin Hale transformed into a makeshift auditorium filled with employees, journalists, and special guests. Towering projectors displayed images of sleek aircraft and rocket prototypes, along with slides of new initiatives to prevent future sabotage. The atmosphere buzzed with cautious optimism. Monica Pierce opened the ceremony, standing at a podium with Win Aerotech's blue and silver logo behind her. She acknowledged the turmoil of recent months, the betrayal from within, and the unshakable determination of honest workers who exposed it. As she spoke, John and Annie stood near the front, flanked by co-workers who had fought alongside them. Caswell and his security team watched from the sidelines, ensuring no more unwelcome surprises. "Today," Monica declared, her voice echoing through the hangar, "we honor those who stepped up in our darkest hours. John Harrington, Annie Harrington, and the many dedicated staff who risk their safety, sometimes their lives, to defend the integrity of our mission. Win Aerotech is stronger for their efforts. A round of applause thundered through the crowd. John felt his face flush, unused to public acclaim. He glanced at Annie, who looked equally bashful yet proud. Monica then turned to them, beckoning them on stage. "Please join me here." They stepped up amid cheers, and Monica handed John a polished plaque inscribed with words of gratitude. Another, smaller plaque went to Annie, saluting her contributions to the company's future. Kyle, who was in the front row, grinned ear to ear, snapping photos with his phone. The sight of the two plaques in official recognition of father and daughter, side by side, made John's heart swell. As we move forward, Monica continued, we do so with renewed vigor. Our new safety protocols, under John's guidance, have already cleared multiple audits. Our next-generation engine designs, aided by Annie's software enhancements, are poised to reshape commercial aviation. Despite the sabotage, Win Aerotech stands tall. The crowd roared, and camera shutters clicked. John swallowed a lump in his throat, imagining Sarah watching from somewhere, nodding with approval. That same resilience and loyalty that once guided him through tough times at Harrington Aero had now shielded an entire corporation. Annie gave his good arm a gentle squeeze, their mutual sense of triumph radiating in that moment. Once the formalities ended, employees flocked around them. Some wanted autographs or selfies, a surreal experience for a small-town mechanic and his teenage daughter. Monica ushered them off the stage to a quieter corner, where she softly admitted, "This is just the beginning. We still face lawsuits, negative press, and the ripple effect of Martin Hale's betrayal. But at least now, we're together, forging a transparent path." John nodded, clasping Annie's hand. He felt the weight of the plaque, a symbol of recognition for living by the values his father instilled: honesty, diligence, family. "Whatever comes," he said, meeting Monica's eyes, "we'll handle it. The sabotage made us stronger. And as long as planes need repairing, I'll be here." Annie grinned, adding, "And as long as there's code to improve, I'll be here too." They exchanged a warm laugh, joined by Monica. Outside, the skyline glistened under the late afternoon sun, a fresh beginning for Win Aerotech. In the midst of the applause, and the memories of sub-basements and flaming crates felt distant, yet they'd forever remind everyone that vigilance, courage, and collaboration were the keys to soaring above adversity. Late that night, John found himself alone on one of Win Aerotech's test runways, illuminated by a string of lights stretching into the horizon. The event was over, and employees had gone home or back to their hotel rooms. Monica and Annie were inside wrapping up final press inquiries. John wandered out for a moment of quiet reflection, gazing at the silent aircraft parked like sleeping giants along the tarmac. He closed his eyes, recalling the swirl of events that brought him here: the first sabotage, the call from Monica Pierce, uprooting his life at Harrington Aero, Annie's heroic stand, the showdown in the sub-basement. The memory of that masked saboteur's crowbar still ached in his shoulder. Yet for all the pain and fear, they'd emerged victorious. Not unscathed, but stronger. A gust of cool wind blew across the runway, rustling his hair. In the near distance, he could see the faint outline of the city skyline, a reminder of how far he'd come from his rural beginnings. He thought of his father, who taught him that a well-tended machine seldom fails, and of Sarah, whose spirit of adventure had nudged him out of his comfort zone more than once. Now, that spirit seemed to live on in Annie, brimming with intelligence and determination, forging her own path in the world. As he turned to walk back, the echo of footsteps alerted him. Annie approached, hands tucked in her sweater pockets, eyes shining under the runway's glow. "Mom used to say the runway was like a beacon for possibilities." "Right?" she asked softly, echoing an old family memory. "I think I get it now. Every plane that lands also takes off again. Every failure or challenge can become a new beginning." John wrapped his good arm around her shoulders. "That's exactly right, kiddo. Life's a series of takeoffs and landings. Sometimes the turbulence is rough, but the destination's worth it. They shared a tender silence, father and daughter standing together under the wide expanse of sky. Annie drew in a breath. So, after everything, do you think we'll stay here for good, or maybe balance our time between Wynn Aerotech and Harrington Aero? He considered the question, heart steady in his chest. We'll see. We've got roots in both places, and each needs us in different ways. Maybe we'll split our time, build a bridge that helps smaller communities connect with big innovation. Annie smiled at that. I like the sound of that. Dad, we can do a lot of good. As they headed back toward the hangar, the runway lights guided their steps like a path of stars in the darkness. A sense of wholeness settled over John. He'd found a place to belong that honored his past while embracing the future. Tomorrow, there'd be more planes to check, more data to sift, more challenges to face. But tonight, he savored the peace and the promise that, despite the storms and betrayals, they had landed on solid ground. In the hush of that moment, John whispered a silent thanks to the memory of Sarah and his father, feeling their presence in the gentle wind. They'd built a legacy of integrity and courage, one that he and Annie would continue. As father and daughter walked side by side, the distant hum of the city blended with the quiet of the night sky, reminding them that new flights always awaited, and no dream was too big or too improbable when guided by unwavering hearts. In the end, it wasn't the fight itself, nor even the flames of betrayal that mattered most. It was the quiet strength discovered along the way, the unbreakable bonds forged in moments of crisis, and the courage found in ordinary hearts when everything hung in the balance. Yes, victory came, but at a cost measured in trust, broken, and innocence lost. Yet from the wreckage rose something new, the enduring legacy of those who refused to surrender to darkness, who believed in the value of honesty, integrity, and sacrifice. Now, as the smoke clears and the echoes of conflict fade into memory, we're left with reflections more powerful than victories or losses. Because courage, real courage, isn't loud. It doesn't boast. It whispers quietly within each of us, reminding us of who we are and who we could yet become. As the lights dim on this chapter, perhaps we should each consider this. When the time comes, and it always does, will we choose comfort or courage, silence or truth? Because in the story of our lives, these are the choices that define us. And when the storm passes, and all that's left is who we chose to be, who will you find looking back at you from the mirror?